I want to start? I want to start with talking about myself. No, I'm kidding. But I'm like, oh, I have this great guest on. They wrote this awesome radical tarot book, and I definitely want to ask you a lot of different questions about queerness and the tarot. But one thing I just wanted to say right off the bat that I connected with in the book is this idea that, like, uh, tarot, you say, not that it makes you gay, but like tarot being an inherently queer experience. And I was thinking about this morning because in 2018, I was living abroad right before I got my first tarot deck. I was, living abroad. I was dating a cis straight man from a distance. He was still living in America. I was traveling Asia. And I broke up with him because he told me he was going to visit me and then he didn't follow through. And it's so funny because and granted, I identify as gay and queer, so like obviously, that's me being in this huge long distance relationship was like a good way to be like, don't really want to don't, don't really want to be with you, but sure. So, long story short, broke up with him. I find myself in Hong Kong. We were supposed to go on vacation together when he visited me, but he pulls out, right? And I booked this solo trip to Hong Kong, and that was like summer of 2018. And I actually got my first tarot deck in Hong Kong.
Oh,
And
cool.
I swear to God, the minute I got that tarot deck, I was like, I can't be straight anymore. Like I was like, I can't do this. So I really do think it's not to say, like you say in the beginning chapter of Radical Tarot, it's not to say tarot makes us gay, but I think there's something even inherently queer about receiving a tarot deck. And like, I don't know, I just view my beginning of my queer exploration and receiving my first deck to be like one and the same.
Yeah.
And I start that because I would love to, probe you. I know you share in the introduction of your book that you got your first reading at a Renaissance fair, which prime gay content. Love it. But yeah, I would love to know, like, how would you describe the parallels between discovering your queerness and also discovering tarot?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for asking this question because this is this is a subject that I love to talk about, and for sharing your story about it. Because I mean, I think to start off, like I'll just say, as I say in the book, whenever we use tarot, we get to know ourselves, basically. It's every time we pull the cards, we're sort of spelunking inside of our own psyches, our desires, our fears, our motivations. Um, and so, if there's something that we have been repressing, avoiding, hiding from, the tarot is going to bring it up. It's going to show us that. And so I think that for me, I know that for me, both times that I came to tarot in my life, first as a teenager and then when I was 30, it was concurrent with my like two different queer awakenings. Um, and the first time when I was in high school and I started reading tarot, that was at the same time as I was realizing like, and accepting that I was bisexual. Um, and like, I was not reading tarot well. I had no resources. I had some like, I had the little white book that came with my Rider-Waite deck. And that was, I think, it as far as tarot resources are concerned. And maybe the little bits that some of the Wicca books and witchcraft books that I had talked about with tarot, but like I had basically nothing. I had no friends that read tarot either. I was afraid to talk about it. I was afraid to tell anybody about what I was doing because I was raised in the Bible Belt in Birmingham, Alabama. Um, and but yeah, still, even so, it was at the same time as I was realizing that I was bisexual, and that I was, you know, kissing some girls and developing some crushes and stuff. And um, eventually, I ended up, though, leaving tarot. I ended up leaving witchcraft as well. Because, like, I think it's because I didn't have good resources and I had no community for it. And so when everything started being hard, I've had struggles with depression and with self-harm and things like that when I was a teenager. Um, I just kind of, I don't know. And when I would look into the future, it would just look so bleak, you know? Like, I didn't see any future at that point in time, which was like the early 2000s in Birmingham, Alabama. I didn't see any future where being myself was going to work out. The only queer role models I had were a creative writing teacher who had to hide who she was because for fear that she would lose her job. Um, and my boyfriend's grandfather, who left his wife after decades of marriage to be himself as a gay man, and live with the love of his life, which I was inspiring, and like I loved that man, but his entire family disowned him except for my boyfriend and my boyfriend's mother. So just none of the role models I had, I just didn't think it would be possible to be who I was. And so I threw away my tarot deck, I threw away my witchcraft books, and I decided to try to be straight, you know? Like, and so that's what I did for the next like 12 years of my life. And I kind of went full nihilist and believed in nothing and was just trying to survive in the only ways that I knew how. Um, I married a cis straight man. Kind of like what you said about your ex-boyfriend. He had a job where he traveled a lot. So I think that's how we stayed married for as long as we did, which was like 4 years. And in my late 20s, witchcraft started coming back into my life through some friends that I made in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I was living then. And with that started to come just like my awareness again. Like it was like I was waking up to the world. Like I remember noticing things like the seasons. Like I had been so dissociated for so long, just completely like out of my body, out of time, and rediscovering any kind of spirituality, which at the time I was calling agnostic paganism, was like coming back into my body and coming back into the world. And so I started, and I'd like discovered what non-binary was. Like it wasn't a word that I had. I didn't know it was a possibility. And I remember the first time I learned that word, I was like, wait, that's a thing that I can be? And then I was like, oh, is this me? And so things started happening. And then when I went to that Renaissance fair and got a reading from the brand new friend that I went with, it just like, I don't know, it like is almost like open Pandora's box in a way. Cause like he put the cards on the table. It's technically a milk crate, but like on the table in air quotes. And was saying like, you know, I think that it was something like something's blocking you from like, you know, the future like that you could have, or like the happiness that you could, like something like there's some sort of blockage, I think is what he was saying. And I remember racking my brain trying to figure out what that was, you know, and I just pulled everything out of my hat. I was like, could it be this thing? Could it be that thing? Could it be this childhood trauma? Could it be this, you know, thing over here? Is it my job? Like I literally pulled everything I could out of the hat until I got to the very fucking bottom and was like, oh, I am not in love with my husband. I need a divorce. And I think I'm gay. You know? Like, and it was just like, I don't know. I started bawling, but like in a good way, you know, like it was just like this gigantic release. And the knowledge was scary because it would mean changing my entire life. But potentially ruining, quote unquote, my life, you know, but just like changing everything. But I was just I was happy, you know. It was like a feeling of joy almost. And so the next day after that tarot reading, I bought my second tarot deck. The first one being the one that I threw in a dumpster in high school, and started reading tarot again. And this time I had resources, I had books, I had the internet, you know, so I could find a community. I had a friend that had just read my cards that I could talk to about it. And through the process of reading the cards, which I did pretty much every day, it guided me through my divorce. And then it guided me through my gender awakening, which was, you know, was beautiful, but was also fraught. Like I feel like I'm rambling. So if you want to jump in with a question, please feel free. I've taken over. This is my podcast now.
No, I honestly, I'm so enjoying this. So yeah, please, please
Good.
continue. Yeah.
I did have a moment like probably like 2 years in to reading that I almost left tarot again. And it's because at that point I had, you know, totally realized and it embraced the fact that I'm non-binary. But this deck I was using was so binary. Like it seemed so binary. You know, I'd gotten to this place in my sort of gender journey where I was like, you know, finally sort of like awakening to the fact that the world as that we live in is so freaking binary. Like gender binary roles, norms, stereotypes everywhere, you know, just like we're saturated in it. To the extent that like you know, gender and heterosexuality are used as like metaphors for the divine, you know, the divine feminine and divine masculine. Why does divinity have to be on the gender binary? Like I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I don't think that the divine has a gender, you know.
Right.
When
Yeah.
we use words like feminine and masculine to talk about these things, what we're really describing is qualities maybe, or like ways of being, ways of relating to ourselves and the world that don't have anything to do with gender necessarily, you know, but are instead things that all of us have, you know, all of us have access to, all of us have inside of us. And then we get into the like sort of apologetics that people use where they're like, well, we have the masculine, we have the divine masculine and divine feminine inside of all of us. I'm like, great, cool. Then why are we still calling it the divine masculine and the divine feminine? Like, can we just like use different words at least? Because all that does is just reinforce the gender binary, you know? Anyway, I have a whole I went on a tangent there, but like same thing with the tarot, with the emperor and the empress, you know. Yeah, or the kings and the queens. I just started getting really pissed off about it. And then I was like, I don't know if I can keep using this tool of the tarot deck if it is so binary, if it's so heavily gendered, if it's so straight. Like the metaphor, you know, at the end of esoteric tarot, it's the reunion, the union of the masculine and the feminine in the world card. In historical, like, esoteric thinking, the person on the world card was said to be a hermaphrodite, as the, like, you know, merger of both masculine and feminine qualities, which today is, we understand, is problematic to make, you know, intersex people a metaphor for like the divine merger of masculine and feminine. Some intersex people might be like, cool, yes, I would like to be that. And a lot are probably like, no, that's not my experience of who I am, and I don't enjoy being used as a metaphor, thank you. You know, but like that merger of masculine and feminine is just using heterosexuality, heterosexual intercourse in a way as a metaphor for divine wholeness, suggesting therefore that we aren't whole unless we're doing it with the opposite sexual organs from ours. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh
It's
my
just
gosh.
saturated in it.
And what's like really striking me about this sort of timeline for you and the tarot is like the first time you threw away tarot as a teenager, it was almost maybe there was some subconscious knowing that like, oh, if I keep working with this, like maybe I'm going to, you know, realize something about myself, or it's going to point shit out to me, or maybe I'm afraid of knowing. And I think that's, for me, it's kind of I've seen people do that, like, and I've seen myself do it. I think I was totally interested in tarot and astrology for a long time, but I had a deep fear of getting a tarot reading up until 2018 when I got my own deck and started reading for myself. But I was seriously afraid, like, what is this tool going to put in front of me? And like, what if I don't want to hear that truth, you know? So it's similar to this sort of avoidance of our queerness. Sometimes we avoid these tools that would show us this queerness. And then fast forward to now, you as a non-binary person, you know, having this journey with like, I just can't stand this binary of the tarot, almost throwing away the tarot then, but it's more like from the opposite perspective. Like, now I know my truth, and this is almost now trying to put me back in a box of
Yeah.
binary, which now I don't want, you know? So it's like this total end of the spectrum, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I had this like reckoning with the tarot when I was like on that point of almost, you know, chucking it again, where I did a reading, and it was just a 3-card reading, and I think it was the Chariot, the Hierophant, and the High Priestess that I pulled. Maybe it might not have been the Chariot, it might have been like the Lovers or something. I can't remember. But the I had this like sudden like lightning flash light bulb moment when I was looking at those cards, where I realized, oh shit, actually the tarot isn't actually binary. It isn't actually gendered, even though we talk about the masculine feminine duality in it, and we have cards like the Empress and the Emperor that have historically been very saturated in gender norms. I was like, fuck, the tarot shows us the appearance of a binary or the appearance of a duality so that we can overcome it, so that we can break it, so that we can realize by the end of the major arcana journey that all of it's an illusion. It's all a dream, because that is the lesson, like that is the journey of the major arcana, right? It's, whether we call it the fool's journey or whatever, usually it's been, said to be a journey to quote unquote enlightenment. And what that quote unquote enlightenment is the reunification of supposed opposites. It's the realization that nothing was actually ever opposite, that it was all part of one thing, that it was all just, a spectrum, or not even a spectrum, because that implies two poles, but like a universe of 3D, 4D, who knows how many Ds, like just multitudinous, expansive, indescribable everything. Like it walks us along that path. And historically, gender has been used to represent that metaphor, but it wasn't ever actually about gender. It wasn't ever actually about, human body parts. It was all a metaphor for something else that's much more numinous. And so I'm interested in how we can work with the tarot towards those means, towards those ends, and like not have to do it through a binary gendered mold, although I do think that was necessary for me to get there, to sort of like crack that egg and get to that place where I had that realization. But like, yeah, I think that one of the things that this amazing pack of cards is best at is confronting us with the things that we think are true, or that we've been taught are true, these roles, modes, categories that we've been taught to put ourselves and everybody else in. It shows us those things, so then we can reckon with them, and we can break them. We can change them even. And I mean that for every single card in the deck does that. So not just the Empress and Emperor, all of them.
Oh my God. Oh gosh, yeah, this is great. And I think in like tarot, let's say a lens of the tarot that's not necessarily queering every card, my mind not only goes to the Empress and the Emperor, but really the Hierophant tells me like, okay, this is what we've been taught. This is how we've been conditioned. This is the truth that you've sponged from your parents, your priest, whatever. And like now it's time to really consider, is this actually what I believe? But it's kind of nice because when you clear the tarot, every single card can have some kind of element of queerness in it. And maybe that's such an obvious statement, but I think like going into the tarot, even as a queer person, I haven't thought about, until the past maybe 2 years or so to be like, okay, every single card could be queer.
Oh yeah.
And it's not just the Hierophant, or it's not just the Empress and the Emperor. It's every single one of them. And one thing I loved in the introduction of your book, you just asked you posed this very innocent like musing, where you're talking about how tarot is queer, and you just say like, maybe there's something queer about you too. And I underlined that because I was like, yes, yeah. Like, I think if you really engage with the tarot, again, it's not to say, tarot turns people capital G gay, or, but like yeah, I think tarot will show you maybe this is queer, and maybe this is, maybe you're not necessarily, like sexually queer or gender queer. Or maybe you'll never identify as those things. But maybe at the same time, tarot starts to show you, oh wait, yeah, like that, this is how I could think of my own queerness or whatnot. But yeah, I just love that musing. Maybe there's something queer about you too.
Yeah.
Also, how confronting that is for a lot of people. Yeah, and maybe why we're sometimes afraid to work with the tarot. Like, oh my God, what if the tarot shows me there's something queer about me, you
Yeah.
know?
And then I have to change my life. Then I have to make different decisions. And that scares us. You know, it's a scary thing to disrupt our lives like that. But in the interest of living a life that's more authentic to who you actually are, eventually you're going to end up in a place where you're a whole hell of a lot happier than you are now living a life of low-key denial, you know, like
Totally.
um but I think that, you know, one of the things that is cool about tarot, well, first of all, people who are drawn to tarot, um tarot's kind of like, it's kind of like a self-selected group. People who come to tarot are already like a little bit weird, you know, like like we've got some like misfit energy. We already are like sort of thinking about or approaching the world in ways that are different from the status quo in the norm, which, you know, tells us either tarot is a tool of the devil, or tells us that tarot is just foolish because, you know, the only things that are real are things that we can like measure and uh, test scientifically with our fancy instruments and stuff. Anybody who's coming to tarot has already done the work to be like, yeah, I mean, fine, but no, like I believe something different. I'm willing to step into the unknown with this tarot deck. Because that's what it is. Whenever we do a tarot reading, we are stepping briefly into a space of unknowing. Even if the eventual goal of that reading is to gain some knowledge about something, you know, to look into this, that, or the other, we're stepping into a place of unknowing in order to do that, where we're like, what could show up? You know, what cards are going to land on the table? We don't know. We have to step into that liminal space in order to get there. And that liminal space, that space of unknowing, is a very queer space.
Yeah.
Queer as in not the norm, queer as in odd, as in other, you know? And so when I say, you know, maybe there's something queer about you in the book, maybe it's, you know, classic LGBTQ queer, or maybe it's just something else. Maybe it's how you see the world, you know, the things that you want for your life. And I do think that there's a lot of people who are straight and who are cis that are still very queer because they're not living inside the boxes of the gender norms that society has laid out for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's so many different ways to be queer. And I think the tarot is an essentially queer tool because of that space it takes us into, and the kind of inquiry it invites. Yeah.
And, you know, on that note, you know, the three, yeah, the three pinnacles of the book for you with tarot is, yeah, tarot is queer. The archetypes are alive, which I want to ask you about. But the third point that you have is tarot does not predict the future. It helps us create it. And my mind is like being blown right now because you're making me think, um, like, of course, I don't really teach the tarot from a predictive lens, but I'm thinking of just even the idea of a future that we can predict, like a planned future. How straight is that?
Yeah.
How heteronormative is that? And this is like the first time I'm really coming to that right now, like this idea that sitting down and using the tarot to say, what's going to happen to me tomorrow? is like heteronormative conditioning vibes.
Yes.
Just as in, like, the programming starts from the minute we're born and we start watching the movie where the princess is pursued by the prince, and you have babies and are married by the time you're 27 and a white picket fence. I would hope we're moving away from that conditioning. Not that there's anything wrong with genuinely wanting that. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, I have straight friends that I adore who genuinely want to procreate, and I'm like, genuinely can't relate, but like I see that that's, you know, a genuine desire for you, and like I respect it. But just this whole thing of like that our future is somehow laid out for us is so annoying to queer
Yes.
people. It's so annoying. And speaking of National Coming Out Day, which is funny, we just realized before we pressed record that it is Wednesday, October 11th, 2023, National Coming Out Day. I mean, part of the pain of coming out is ruining other people's vision of the future for you. Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so when we, going back to what you said, tarot does not predict the future. Stepping into a space where you can create your future is inherently queer. Yeah, I mean, I would love to know, yeah, your reflections on that kind of stuff. I don't know if that hits you at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely 1000%. Um, yeah, I think it's in the full chapter. I think it's in the full chapter. I talk about an idea from Jose Esteban Munoz, who is a queer theorist who wrote the book Cruising Utopia, which is a great classic of queer theory. And he in the book brings up the idea of straight time and queerness is time.
Yeah.
Where straight time is exactly what you just described. It's that orderly projection of, you're born, you go to school, you graduate, you go to college, you meet your future spouse, you get married, you have kids, like that ordered, you work until you or retire or you die, like, that straight and orderly, straight in both meanings of the word, um, conception of time, of what we're doing in a life, but also just the sort of orderly progression of the universe. Even queerness is time is something totally different. It doesn't move in straight lines. It understands a different sort of conception of what is possible for the future and for the present and even for the past, which is a whole idea that I am not qualified to like speak on, but a quick book recommendation for anybody who wants to explore that idea in fiction is Confessions of the Fox by Jordy Rosenberg. I think I'm getting that right. And it's an amazing, amazing novel that I think exists in this conception of queer time. So everybody go read that book. Also written by a trans author, and featuring a trans main character, I should say, as well. So excellent book. But yeah, so in the full chapter, I talk about this idea of straight time and queerness is time. And in the imagery of the classic full card, where we have the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, full card at least, where we have the cliff and the fool walking towards the cliff. And in this card, we're sort of like presented with the choice of, do we stay on the cliff? Do we keep clinging to the cliff? Do we go, no, that's foolish, fool. You're about to fall and like fall to your death and die and ruin everything and break all the bones in your body. Dear Lord, stay on the cliff. Or do we take the step off and see what happens? Straight time is the cliff. Queerness's time is the void, on the other side of the cliff's edge. And the tarot literally in the very, well, it wasn't always the first card in the deck, but in the Fool, we are invited to take that step, to enter that void of queerness's time. And I think that's also the space of the tarot reading where we're literally divining different futures. And I think even the act of pulling cards, and the act of interpretation itself is an act of changing the future, potentially. Because when we pull cards on the table and we're looking at cards in a future position, we're going, well, do we want that? Like, does that look good or not? And if it doesn't look good, what can we do to change it? We are literally creating the future. Do we go, oh shit, there's the 10 of Swords in the future, so I guess I'll just keep doing everything that I'm doing and just end up there? Like, no, we go, okay, what can I do to avert this outcome, right? We are creating the future. We're changing our trajectories, So, yeah.
Yeah, you're making me, oh, yeah, I'm just sitting in like how harmful that sort of linear heteronormative span of time is for literally everyone.
Oh
uh,
yeah.
Everyone. I happen to I'm based in Chicago, and I do a handful of like tarot events, and I'm picky about which ones I choose, just because I'm a I'm a highly sensitive, neuro spicy person, and events burn me out. So I'm like, oh, like, picky. But there's this bachelorette party that I said yes to, and it was super fun. Like, but I was struck.
Mhm.
And this isn't me talking shit about like any of these women. Like, these were all like really amazing people, and we had some great readings and thoughtful readings. But I was struck that like in this room of like basically 20 straight women, pretty much 85% of them sat down with like the same life story. Like,
Yeah.
I I'm having, and they all had like kids under like 7 years old, and like now they're in this like this heteronormativity time warp. And like, again, this isn't me like criticizing that, because I do believe on some level like that's their sole choice, right? And like that's what they truly wanted and everything. But like as a queer person reading for all this group of straight women at a bachelorette party, which is basically a party about heteronormativity,
Yeah.
I'm just like, I walked out of that that event saying, "Oh my god, thank God I'm queer." I've been saying that a lot. I've been really saying that a lot lately. Like, I've just been like, "Thank
It's a it's a
God."
it's a blessing. It is a blessing, because we already have to reckon with our perceived life trajectory, and what we already have to step outside of that space, and so we're more likely able to just like free ourselves from all of the false choices and conditioning that we can. Like, it is a blessing, and I agree, thank God. But I think that like when you were talking about how maybe there's something queer about you, how that could be like a confronting question. I think that for a lot of straight people, like, so in the all of the trans panic that's happening right now, for
Mhm.
instance. And I'm non-binary, but I also identify as trans, and my spouse is also trans. Um, all this fucking trans panic that's going on in the United States, I think is, well, like, first, it's part of the political machine. It's a tactical political thing that people in power pulling strings in order to get votes and blah 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 blah. But um, the real actual people who are so scared of like their kid seeing a drag queen in a park, like, where that fear comes from, I think comes from some, like, I suspect comes from some sort of like core place of being terrified that they could have made different decisions in their lives about who they are and what they wanted, and they didn't. And the terror of that, and of looking back, you know, having to reconsider your conception of gender, of who you are, who you could be, what's okay to wear, what's like, how it's okay to act. Reconsidering those things can be so fucking confronting and terrifying. And like, so it's not about the trans people. I mean, we already knew that. It was never about the trans people. It's, I think, about all of these people who have been very closeted in their lives, very protected, very, you know, that straight and narrow path, adhering to the rules that we are taught. If you do this thing and then this thing and then this thing and you act this way, then you will be happy. You know, the great American dream, all of that stuff. Like, here is the recipe for happiness. Stay inside of these boxes, do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of people who are unhappy and the terror of confronting that, and confronting, you could have made different decisions, not even because these people are like secretly gay or trans. They not at all, but just they could have made different decisions in their lives. They didn't have to do the things that they were programmed to do, and that's a terrifying thing to think about.
Oh, totally. And I think, you know, and this isn't necessarily me, you know, suggesting at all that we have like empathy for these like politicians that are so pro, or like pro the anti-trans movement and all this. But at the same time, I'm like, um, something I've kind of been holding space for is, um, I see a huge fear reaction in that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't, I'm not I'm not throwing whatever Mike Pence a bone or whoever's up
No,
there.
because
But
they're the people who know exactly what they're doing. They're not doing
exactly.
it for the children.
Exactly.
Like, they're doing it to rile up people up and get votes and crap like that.
Oh, totally, totally. It's like it's like, you know, there's such a deep, yeah, there's like a deep fear of loss of control, I think, with this
Mhm.
underlying this whole thing, which I think queer people can relate to. We see that part in any sort of coming out situation too. Even if we had perfect parents, even if we had two lesbian moms who raised us in San Francisco or whatever, you know, like still there's some loss of control in the sort of coming out journey. And like, you know, I think we can all kind of, we've all felt that deep visceral fear of, I'm losing control of the narrative that I've been programmed to live. And not everybody in this lifetime is gonna like break out of that. You know, it might take a few lifetimes. That's the Pisces in me talking. But you know, and also maybe me speaking to like my inner child too, like my wounded inner child who has parents who probably won't really understand my queerness ever. And
Mhm.
sometimes a good way for me to cope with that is thinking like, okay, like, you know, it's not this lifetime for them. Like, yeah, I don't know. But anyways, one thing I want to veer into too, Charlie, is um, well, it's like back to the Fool. I mean, have you ever seen a bigger homo than the Fool? No.
Yeah. Truth. Truth. Yeah. Yeah. And in all of the Fool's like archetypal history throughout, you know, tarot deck art history, the Fool has always been an outsider.
And
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
and I was thinking, you know, I teach a sort of twice a month tarot meetup in Chicago that's in person, and I'm lucky enough to have attracted like a group of like weirdos. Most of us are queer on some level. Most of us are neurodiverse in some way, and like, oh my God, we're the best tarot readers. Like it makes such an interesting class. But yeah, going back to the Fool, I think the Fool is neurodiverse as well. And that's a whole other thing that we could talk about too, that we won't maybe get into right now, but this sort of correlation between the Fool's neurodiversity and the Fool's queerness and the Fool's understanding of queer time, and
Yeah.
how when the Fool jumps off the cliff, they are like sort of saying, okay, see you later, straight time.
Yeah.
I'm going into the void, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
now,
The
one thing
fool
I want,
does the fool does things that the rest of the world says are foolish or says are insane. And when I use that word, I'm using it to literally mean the world thinks it, like, there's something wrong with your head that you're doing this,
yeah,
and the original fools in like the earliest decks that we have access to uh, were beggars. They were like people wearing rags. They were the like village fool, who was a person who was neurodivergent, who saw the world differently, who experienced the world differently, who didn't think or act in the ways privileged by the mainstream and the norm. And so, yeah, the fool has this like deep, long history in literally just experiencing the world and reality in ways different than the privileged norm, straight and narrow, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to put an exclamation mark at the end of what you said with
yeah.
that.
Well, and I think too, like this is kind of prompting the whole experience of buying a tarot deck, getting into the tarot, learning the tarot, being open to this question or this concept. Maybe there's something queer about me. It is sort of a fool thing,
Yeah.
when you, oh, I remember when I bought my first tarot deck in a bookstore in Hong Kong. That was a fool moment. I was saying yes to the journey. Now, when it comes to actually, I guess, probing at our queerness with the tarot, of course, we're speaking to like tarot, using tarot in general, we'll probe at your queerness. Using tarot in general will maybe have you question some things about yourself. And will that questioning lead to, I'm gay, I'm non-binary, I'm trans? Maybe, maybe not. Will that lead to like, oh, I actually want to be living my life this way and not the way society taught me? I would say that's even more likely than the other result. But one thing I wanted to ask you is like, specifically, just making space for maybe anybody who's listening who does have a tarot deck and maybe is struggling with like sexuality and gender and how to explore those things. And um, I guess, how have you used tarot, or how would you suggest using tarot to maybe parse some of those things out? Um, because just even one thing I remember is, think there's this part in at least my queer journey where I didn't I didn't have like I didn't want to like really go on a date with a woman, or really start dating other queer people at some point, because I was scared. But yet I so wanted the answer of like, I wanted the answer without the work. I wanted the,
Well, we're never trained for how to like date queerly. That was not part of our rom-com Disney movie upbringing.
exactly,
I
exactly.
remember feeling the same way. I was like, how do I do this? Like, I know the things to do to like attract a man, but like, how do I attract literally anybody else? Like, how do we do this? What does this dance look like? Which is another stepping into the unknown and figuring it out.
Yes. And it like, so glad I ended up stepping into the unknown, but like for a long time I wasn't ready. And I did actually, it was Cassandra Snow. They sent me this exploring your sexuality spread. over Twitter, and I don't know if they still use this, but like I'll read what they DM'd me. They're like, this was like a few years ago. They said, I lay a line of 5 or 7 cards down with straight on one end and gay on the other, or man on one end and woman on the other end. And since it's a spectrum and not a line, I do like a half circle shape to represent the spots totally beyond the binary. Then I ask, where will I be the happiest? And
Ah, yes. I remember
truly,
this. I remember them talking about this spread. I think in the 2021 tarot conference
yes.
that Nick Kepley put on. And I remember Cassandra saying something then about like an alteration they'd made to the spread or something to like add to it or like improve upon it, but I don't remember what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I'll reach out to them and say that we mentioned this spread in our interview, and I would love the most updated version to maybe put it in the show notes or something if they're comfortable with that. But anyways, that's to say, like, that's actually like literally I did that spread on the straight end of the spectrum. I had the 9 of swords, and then like on the gay end of the spectrum I had the star. It was
Yeah.
the most obvious reading ever, and I was like, okay, I have no choice, I have to like bite the bullet and start to like have that exposure therapy of exploring what is queer dating, like things like that. But I want to throw the ball to you. Like, do you have a spread, or do you have a sort of process that you use the cards or did use the cards to kind of get yourself over that cliff, I
Yeah.
guess?
Yeah. In my tarot journey or my gender journey, my queer journey, I wasn't using spreads like that to get there, but on the other side of the journey, I have come up with like a few different spreads or methods, mostly for like feeling things out. Like, I don't like putting things in like a sort of like black or white fatalistic sort of box when it comes to literally anything. So instead of doing like and I said my little spiel about spectrums earlier. Um and so like I might instead do something where I literally just like ask the deck, um like tell me about my gender, or tell me about my sexuality, and then pull 3 cards, or 5 cards if you want to, or 1 card. It doesn't matter, but decide how many cards you're going to pull and then pull some cards and read them just holistically. Be like, okay, so let's say you've got the Knight of Wands and you've got the 3 of Cups and you've got the Ace of Swords. I don't know. Like we might look at that combo and be like, all right, we've got some like strong, flashy, like bravado energy over here with like the Knight of Wands. We've got some like sharp, discerning, truth centered energy with the Ace of Swords. And with the 3 of Cups, we've got this like softness, this celebration, maybe poly sort of energy happening, and just sort of take them together and see what they say. Uh and then I also like to use a spread for any sort of binaries that we're trying to break or break out of, where I will like intentionally pick cards to represent each end of the binary, whatever it is. So maybe it's a gender binary, maybe it's like the straight gay, like I don't know, or maybe it's 2 things that seem to be irreconcilable opposites in your life, or ways of thinking about the world or something. I'll pick 2 cards to represent them, put them on either end, and then shuffle the deck and pull 3 cards for like what can help bridge this binary, like how are these things connected and related, and then once again read those 3 cards more holistically. And that is I'm pretty sure represented in the I made 22 spreads as like a free PDF download for Radical Tarot that people can get on my website. And it asks for you to like put in like information about where you got the book. But then you can just like download it for free. And a version of that spread I just mentioned is in there as the temperance spread, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, and a different sort of version of it is actually in the Fifth Spirit Tarot guidebook for the deck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got cards 1 and 2, two conflicting parts of you, alternately a false binary that you're assuming to be true. You can also do this where you like you shuffle and pick those cards randomly, which can bring up new things to think about, like new things, binaries that your binary ways of thinking that you haven't previously been aware of, right? And then the spectrum of interconnection between the two for those 3 cards. And then a 6th card for the harmony arising from the complexity. And I do have, so this is a version, and of course I'm showing this to Mallory on the screen, and nobody on the podcast is going to be able to see this, but I do have a version of that sort of gender or sexuality exploration spread that I described earlier in the Fifth Spirit Tarot guidebook that comes with the deck as well, where it's just pulling 5 cards to consider different things about you. So card number 1 is something to consider about your gender. Card number 2 is something to consider about your sexual orientation. Card number 3 is something to consider about your relationship style. Card number 4, something to consider about your sensuality and pleasure. And 5, something about you that's pretty dang queer.
I love this. Yeah.
Which I challenge cishet people to use that spread, because there might be ways that, you know, even within your cisgenderality, that's not a word. Ways even in your gender or in your heterosexuality that like could be shaken up a little bit, like things about yourself that you might not know, for like what you like, what kind of relationship dynamics you want to be in, you know, that aren't necessarily what you have been taught to think are what you should do, you know.
Right. Yeah. Like I love the idea of like, sure, like like a straight cis het person still doing that spread and kind of being awakened to like, oh, like I really have wanted to explore this kink,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
like I've only really experienced like the vanilla side of like my sex life, and like this spread is really letting me kind of feel into the actual possibility of exploring this or whatnot. So I always think that's amazing too. Weird thing, and we can totally cut this out if you don't feel like it, but would it be like kind of a fun way to wrap up this episode? Can me and you both pull a card for ourselves and
Yeah.
ask I want one of those questions, like maybe like what's coming up for your sexuality right now? Does that feel too personal, or does that feel like a good pull?
I'm game. I'm game.
Okay, okay.
And then if I pull a card that I'm like, oh, I'm not sharing that, then I'll let you know.
That's great. And I'll let me go grab my deck, and I'll be right back. Yeah, as the teachers, we'll lead by example, and we'll do the example spread, and we'll just invite everybody who's listening if they want to join in, and ask the deck like, yeah, what's coming up with your for you and your sexuality at the moment. And
I'm gonna do what's coming up for my queerness, which could encapsulate that or anything.
okay, I like that better. I like that better. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Um, what are you feeling? Do you want to go first, Charlie?
I mean, I don't even know if there's like much to say about this card. It's hilarious that this is the card that I pulled, and this is truly, truly actually the card that I pulled. It's the Sun. And the Sun card in my deck in Fifth Spirit Tarot actually has me and my partner on it.
Oh my gosh, that I love that.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
oh,
that's me and Aaron on the card. We're in a park. I'm just going to describe it for the listeners. We're in a park, sitting on a picnic blanket, with a dog, which is funny because we just adopted a dog 2 months ago. Finally, this was an aspirational dog when I originally illustrated this. And the sun is shining, and there's people, playing in the background in the park. And for me, the Sun card is about visibility. It's about being wholly and fully yourself, despite the haters, despite the people who want to put you in a box. And I do actually in the Fifth Spirit Tarot guidebook and in Radical Tarot talk about this card in the context of coming out, which is fitting based on our conversation today, and today being National Coming Out Day, because that's a radical act of visibility. It's literally making yourself visible, in your fullness. And it's also a radical act of self-love too, because like as an act of going like, no, I love myself enough to do this. And for what's coming up with like my queerness right now, I mean, I think this card is probably just like it's acknowledging what a big gay trans moment I'm having right now in a very public way with the publication of Radical Tarot and everything. And in the cards illustration, I'm wearing a binder. But since I illustrated the card, I've gotten top surgery and stuff. And so like just that I'm really feeling really good in myself, in my queerness, in all of the ways right now.
mm.
um, and yeah, just really passionate about queer joy and how that can has changed my life, and how I really believe that it can change the world. So yeah.
Totally.
What did you get?
Well, first of all, I love it, Charlie, and I love that you pulled that card. And you'll freak out because I also pulled the Sun.
Oh shit.
Oh my God. And it is funny that you
Oh.
isn't that so well, it's funny that you correlate the sort of coming out with the Sun in a way. Because very recently, me and my mom had a discussion for the first time about my queerness. And for me as a queer person, coming out, I think everybody feels this way. It's a complicated thing. And like, I never felt aligned with this sort of big coming out moment because I don't know. It just doesn't feel like me. What felt good for me as a queer person was just like very nonchalantly dropping, to my best friend, like, oh, I'm going on a date with a girl next week. And my best friend being like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like
Mhm.
that's all I really ever wanted it to be. And honestly, the people who know me and love me, for me, have reacted like that. And it's been ultimately positive. One of the reasons I was sort of avoiding that sort of information dropping with my parents, was because I knew I wasn't going to get this sort of nonchalant, like, oh yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Let us know how it goes. Like I was only going to get a response that was going to require some emotional labor on my part. And I, quite frankly, I just didn't want to do the emotional labor of that. And I don't know if I was ever really like, up in the middle of the night with like sort of tingle in my stomach being like, oh my God, my parents don't know I'm queer. It was never that. I don't care. It's more like, I don't want to have this dumb conversation with them and they're going to say something dumb. And you know what? They did say something very dumb, and I think what I'm reflecting on is I was able to really hold my ground. And similar to getting my first tattoo this year, it's like a very visible arm piece. Yes. Because, when you're a lesbian, you have to have an arm tat. But
Required.
like, how are we supposed to let other people know? But like akin to when my mom, saw my tattoo, hated it. And I did a really good job, I will say, of being like, you know what? I love it. It feels like me. I'm sorry you don't like it, but I love it. And sorry, see ya.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
that kind of attitude, it was almost the precursor of the queer
Yeah.
discussion where I really had to be like, sorry you have that limited view. That's not about me at all. And I'm gonna go be queer now and go on a date with a hot girl and have fun. Have fun in your, I don't know, like have fun in your white picket fence prison. Like that,
Yeah.
like, and maybe that sounds kind of cynical. But anyways, that's my son reflection card in this moment, like this sort of, I don't need anybody's permission to be happy and to feel good about me. And like anybody's perception of you and your choices in life, and it's more about them than it is about you. Such an obvious thing, but it's true with the sun.
Yeah. And standing in your truth and in like feeling that rightness in who you are and in like the life that you are living,
Yes.
um despite despite anything else. Yeah, that's total sun.
Yeah, it is so well. Oh my gosh, so awesome. Well, thank you for holding space for me to share that, and I hope that wasn't too much, but I guess.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And
Oh,
I'm sorry that that's the response that you got, but you're you're sunning it up, obviously.
yeah, I almost feel like sometimes when, as queer people, when we get that response, there's a freedom in getting that response too, in a weird way. Because it's like, okay, yeah, I got that response that I feared, but at least I don't have to fear it anymore. And
Yeah.
now I can raise my middle finger just a little higher.
Yeah. And freedom is also one of the things that is associated with the sun. So
Hey,
perfect. Yeah. And you're also then also sort of freeing yourself from other people's expectations because you're literally just going like, yeah, I'm not fulfilling your expectations of me anymore. I'm just doing myself now.
yes,
Yeah.
it all goes back to like, is it really even about sexuality, or is it just freeing yourself from straight people time?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Freeing yourself from the pre-programmed life that other people have decided that you should live.
exactly.
So,
Awesome. Well, Charlie, it was such a pleasure to have you on, and I'm so glad we got to talk a little bit more. And of course, I'll have all of your stuff in the show notes. But do you want to give just a little shout out to the book and where to buy it? And like, is there a specific website for the book, or do we go to your website? How does?
you can buy the book pretty much wherever books are sold. So you can buy it on, whatever website of your choosing, but you can also buy it from me. And I love it when people do that because it directly helps me. So my website is thewordwitchtarot.com, and you'll find it there in the shop. That's also where you can then get the free PDF download of those 22 major arcana spreads if you want it. And it's called Radical Tarot. I think we've said that. Yeah, you can also get the Fifth Spirit deck on my website as well, or support your local bookstore. And even if your local bookstore doesn't currently carry them, you can ask your local bookstore to carry it, to order it in, and they will be happy to do that. So
amazing. Yes, buy it from Charlie's website and not Daddy Jeff if you can avoid it. And also, Charlie, you've got a Gay Marseille tarot deck coming out next year. I'm so excited. So that's dropping in 2024. And then I also hear that there's another book called Queer Devotion. Is that also going to drop in 2024?
That's going to be 2025.
Okay.
And so that's currently I'm working on finishing up the Gay Marseille tarot, which will be available in like late winter, early spring of this next year, 2024. And I am not finishing, I'm in the thick of writing Queer Devotion, which is a exploration of the queer divine, if you will, the queer spirit in figures of myth and folklore and legend, in which I kind of like, my goal with it is to make these figures accessible to queer and trans people, and also to, in many cases, sort of like queer the stories themselves. So a little bit of what we were talking about earlier with like queering the past, like the ability, like the queerness is time, and like, so it's cool. So one of the chapters that I've written so far, for instance, is called Birth of Transgender Venus. And it's like a trans retelling of one of Venus Aphrodite's origin stories. So that's what I'm working on right now, and that'll come out. It's currently expected in May 2025. So yeah, right before that.
We'll look forward to that. And I think you said you're Gemini moon, right? So wait, this is perfect because Jupiter's gonna move into Gemini in a little while, maybe like in 4 or 5 months, and it'll be kind of cool to be finishing that book and like having it come out with Jupiter and Gemini kind of.
Oh, that's very interesting to know, because not only is my moon there, but Chiron is there for me as well. And there is something about that feels like healing. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Amazing. Couldn't help the professional astrologer in me couldn't help but
However, that's also my 8th house. So well, I don't know.
yeah. Well, I think for me too, 8th house can be like transmutation.
Yeah.
And like, I wonder all the stuff you're transmuting in that book. So yeah, literally and figuratively. Cool, Charlie. Well, thanks so much for having this chat with me, and I hope to have you on again one day soon.
Yes, I would love it. Thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation. So
Thank you.
okay.